In this video, we're going to be talking about Acumatica project accounting. This is the first video in a series of videos focused on project accounting, and this one is going to focus on the summary tab of the project profile. This is how you would first get started with setting up a new project in Acumatica. So this is the project profile within Acumatica, and this is the screen that you use to maintain your project as well as set up a new project. We're going to go over all the fields here in the Summary tab and describe what they are, and then in subsequent videos we're going to cover the other topics, tasks, budgets, balances, billing, change orders, and so on. So the first thing we do when we set up a new project is we would add a project. Our project ID, in my setup, I have it so that I can manually enter a project ID. But the project ID is part of the segmented keys within Acumatica. So one of the configuration screens is called segmented keys. And you could decide how you want that project ID to be formatted. Do you want multiple segments? Do you want the segments validated? It's similar to the sub-account structure in Acumatica. So you might have the first 5 characters maybe represent the customer ID, and then you have a sequential number, or maybe you have the year as one of the segments and then a sequential number. So however you'd like to structure that, you do that in the segmented keys and then in the numbering sequences. Again, in my demo, I am just using a free form project ID, so I entered part of the customer ID and a number. Okay, the customer ID is optional. If you want to track costs for your own internal projects and you're not going to do any billing, there's no requirement that you have to have a customer ID. In our demo project here, I used Alphabet Land School. And then you can use templates. You can set up templates in Acumatica related to the projects. And let's just drill down on this time and materials template. So you could see that the template looks very similar to the project screen. You set up your parameters, tasks, you can do budgeting and GL accounts and so on. And that's just a way to shortcut the setup and to make sure that you don't have any errors when you set things up. So I did use this time and materials template when I created the project, and then that filled in some of the parameters for me, and then I tweaked them as required for this particular project. The description is required, so we're just going to call this give it a name, something that represents the actual project and will be easy to identify the project. And then the status, when I first create this project as new, the system puts it in as an in planning status, and it's on hold. When I'm ready, I can take it off hold. I can't put any transactions against it until I take it off hold. But once I do that, it'll be active. Now, Acumatica does have the workflow and approval, so you can set that up in the project preferences screen. I do not have that turned on in this demo system, but if you'd like, you can set it up so that once I take this off hold, the project will be routed for approval before anyone can put transactions against it. If that was the case, then it would be awaiting approval. So over here, we have some summary information about the financial status of the project. The assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. We're going to talk more about this in another video as we start to accumulate costs and revenue. But when we set up our account groups on the project, we designate different groups as representing income and expenses or assets and liabilities. And so this will populate for you as you begin to do transactions against the project. Down in the summary area, we can decide whether we want the revenue budget to be at a task level only or task and item level. So if I click on this revenue budget tab, this is where I would set up my budget for the revenue side, and I can do it by task. But since I said task and item, I can get more granular, and I can plan my budget by task and then by inventory item. So these inventory IDs are non-stock items that you set up. These are representing labor, for example, so these are labor items. So for the same task, I can budget 2 different labor items, or as many as I'd like. And you can also budget supplies, materials, things like that. So you can get more specific than just task if you'd like. That's what we've done here. The start and end date is for information. This doesn't drive anything or prohibit you from entering anything outside of this date range. Project Manager, this will be a lookup into your employee setup. And so Project Manager can be used in your approval process as well as for reporting. So it's a nice field to take advantage of. The last revenue change order number, if you're using change orders, then this will increment by project for a revenue budget change order. And if you don't see this field, you do not have the change orders enabled in the enable disable screen. So if you'd like to use change orders and you don't have this field or this change order workflow field, then you need to ask an administrator for Acumatica to enable the change order capability for you. Currency rate if you're using multi-currency, and then the change order workflow. If you do want to use change orders against this project, you'll need to check this or you won't be able to enter a change order. You can see once I checked it, create change order became active up here, and if I uncheck it, that button is inactive. Restrict employees and restrict equipment. So do I want to restrict who can enter information against this project? And for restrict employees, this applies to time cards, expense claims, and the ability to add that employee when you're doing project transactions. So it's only really for project-related activity. If I restrict employees, and the way I do that is I go to the Employees tab and I list which employees are able to post information against this project, time cards, for example. This doesn't apply to entering general ledger transactions or accounts payable transactions. It's strictly for the project-related modules like time and expenses. Okay, and then restrict equipment also has a tab for restricting what equipment can be posted against this project. Track production data will give us some additional columns on the cost budget. So if I go over to my cost budget, and I can see I have certain information here for putting in what my cost budget is. If we go here and we say track production data, we go back over here and I'm going to refresh this grid. You can see that it added some additional columns. So what it does is it allows you to collect some data from the field, and it's how much is it going to cost to complete the project, what's the cost at completion, and what percent do I actually think is completed. So it's not a calculated value, it's something that you manually input. And then it will also save those fields, the last one. So as you change it, it will move your fields from here, these values over to the last. So these would not be editable. So that's what that checkbox does. The billing currency, again, if you're using multi-currency, and then the billing period. I'm going to make this project, and let's suspend it for a moment so we can look at the drop-down. That activates this field. The billing period, is it weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, or is it on demand? So I'm going to say on demand, and I could pull the transactions for any cutoff date that I'd like. If I do monthly, for example, it's going to do it through the end of the month. It always tracks the last billing date, and then it will suggest the next billing date, and it expects that you're going to be billing monthly in that case. So we're going to leave ours on demand. These dates, like I said, were tracked by the system. Default location is the default location for this project for the customer that it's related to. So since this is Alphabet Land Schools, then these are the two locations that I have on that customer. The terms, that defaults from the customer. You can choose any terms that you have set up in the system. I'm going to scroll down so we can see the bottom of the screen. The allocation rule drives how you bill. It drives how you account for transactions. It can determine how you look up your rates The allocation rule is optional. You can either use it for billing or you can just use a billing rule for billing, so you don't have to have an allocation rule. If you'd like to do WIP accounting, you'll need an allocation rule, and it allows you more flexibility than just using the billing rule. The allocation rule is optional. It allows you to mark up transactions, determines how you recognize revenue, what GL accounts you use, what account groups you hit. If you want to use WIP accounting, you'll want to use an allocation rule. If you don't use an allocation rule, you can just look up rates, like using prices, with the billing rule. But if you do use the allocation rule, you'll have some more flexibility. Do you want to run the allocation when you release your project transactions? In other words, do you want to automatically have the system allocate for you, or do you want to run the process manually? So I usually like to turn that on. And then the billing rule determines which transactions do I look at when it comes time for billing. And again, if you're not allocating, you can tell it how to mark things, or how to charge, or how to bill for transactions as well. So we're going to talk about that more when we talk about billing in the billing or invoicing video. What branch of my company is this project associated with? And then the rate table is where you actually define the rates and how you're going to look them up. So what criteria drives the rates that you charge for various transactions? And you don't have to have a rate table. You can use the pricing capabilities with the non-stock items if you want a simpler way to bill. And again, we'll go through the rate tables when we talk about billing and allocations. So one thing to point out here is that when you're doing your transactions, your allocations, and your billing, the system is going to use those fields associated on the tasks. So these are 3 tasks on this project, and each task has a rate table, allocation, and billing rule. On the summary screen, this just really serves as a default, these fields. So any tasks that I set up after I've established these fields, allocation rule, billing rule, and rate table, on my summary screen, any tasks I set up are going to inherit these. But you just need to be cautious that if you set up tasks and then you come back over here and you make some changes, or you add something you hadn't filled in before, it will not roll down to the individual tasks. So you will have to go into the task screen and put these values in here and make sure they're correct on each task. And that's something to look out for. If you find that it's not allocating or billing as you expected, it's possible that the tasks don't have the proper information. Okay, to create Proforma on billing. So what this will do is when you run the billing, it will create an invoice draft before it creates the invoice. So the draft is nice. It allows you to make changes, mark things up or down, remove things from invoices, and either write them off or save them for later. And do that. You can also send the draft for approval before you actually create your AR invoice. So I usually like to turn that on. Use T&M revenue budget limits. Do I want to do a not to exceed, T&M not to exceed? And if I do that, I can use this checkbox. I'll have some additional information that I would put in on the revenue budget tab. And there's also a configuration option for whether I want the system to just warn me if I exceed the budget limit, or to not allow me to proceed with that. Do I want to automatically release the AR documents? When I do run the billing, do I want the AR document created from that to be automatically released, or do I want it left in a hold state? And then on this side of the screen, we have our bill to information that defaulted in from the customer. Just like other Acumatica screens, you can check the override checkbox and edit the information if you'd like. The visibility settings determine in the other modules in Acumatica, where can I see this project? So if I turned off GL, for example, I could not enter this project in a journal entry. When I was in the journal entry and I went to put in the project, this would not be one of the options. And that's useful in the tasks as well, which we'll look at when we talk about tasks, because some of your tasks you don't want to allow time entry, for example, against certain tasks. And then there is a project quoting capability, which is also enabled in the Enable Disable features. If the project was created from a quote, you'll have your quote number here, and you'll be able to drill back to it. So that's the summary information for setting up a project. In the next video, we'll talk about the tasks. For more information on Acumatica, contact us at Software Solutions Group.